People who've been in a bizarre long-running feud, what was it over and how did it end? Mine wasn't with a person. It was with a goose. And it nearly cost me my sanity. It all started 3 years ago. I'm a graphic designer, and I work from home, which is a blessing and a curse. My little slice of heaven is a modest suburban house with a backyard that I pour my heart and soul into. We're talking a perfectly manicured lawn, a small but vibrant vegetable patch, and a custom-built bird feeder that attracts a delightful menagerie of finches and robins. It was my sanctuary, the place I'd go to decompress after a long day of staring at pixels. My pride and joy was a small stone patio with a comfortable chair where I'd drink my morning coffee. That chair was ground zero for the war. The first encounter was deceptively benign. I was out on the patio, mug in hand, enjoying a rare bit of English sunshine. Then I saw him. A Canadian goose, larger than any I'd ever seen up close, waddled out from behind my prize-winning azalea bush. He had a swagger, an air of entitlement that was almost comical. He stopped at the edge of my lawn, fixed me with a beady black eye and let out a single imperious honk. It wasn't a friendly hello. It was a declaration. It sounded like a rusty car horn being used to issue a challenge. I chuckled, thinking nothing of it. "Morning to you too, buddy," I said, taking a sip of coffee. He took a step forward, onto my pristine lawn. Then another. He lowered his head, his neck a long serpentine S-curve, and with a swift, violent motion, he tore a chunk of grass right out of the ground. He chewed it with a smug, deliberate slowness, never breaking eye contact. "Hey," I shouted, standing up, "knock it off." He swallowed, shook his tail feathers in a gesture of pure, unadulterated defiance and tore out another chunk. This was no random act of foraging. This was a message. That first week was a series of minor skirmishes. I'd clap my hands, he'd hiss. I'd run at him, he'd retreat just far enough to be out of reach before turning to honk insults at me. He started leaving presents on my patio. Not randomly, but in specific high-traffic areas. Right in front of the door. Directly on my welcome mat. Once, and I still don't know how he managed the trajectory, on the seat of my patio chair. I started calling him Hannibal. He had the same cold calculating intelligence in his eyes. I decided I needed to escalate. My peaceful, zen-like existence was being systematically dismantled by a waterfowl with a Napoleon complex. My first strategy was water-based. I bought a high-powered water pistol, the kind designed for teenagers. I lay in wait behind my kitchen curtains, heart pounding like a soldier in a foxhole. The moment Hannibal set his webbed foot on my property, I slid the door open, took aim, and fired. A powerful stream of water hit him square in the chest. For a glorious second, I thought I'd won. He stumbled back, ruffled his feathers, and looked utterly shocked. Then he did something I never expected. He started flapping his wings and running through the spray, honking with what I can only describe as joyous abandon. He thought it was a game. He was using my weapon as a personal mobile birdbath. Defeated, I retreated indoors, the sound of his triumphant honks echoing in my ears. My next plan was more technical. I read online that geese are deterred by things that mimic predators, so I bought 2 plastic owls with reflective eyes and placed them strategically in the garden. For the first day, it worked. Hannibal kept his distance, eyeing the stoic plastic sentinels with suspicion. I felt a surge of pride. I had outsmarted him. On the morning of the second day, I looked out my window to see one of the owls lying on its side, and Hannibal was systematically pecking the reflective eyes out of the other one. He then dragged its decapitated plastic head onto my patio and left it there like a trophy, a warning to all other faux predators. The feud was becoming a neighborhood spectacle. My next-door neighbor, Mrs. Gable, a sweet old woman who saw the good in everything, thought my rivalry was adorable. "Oh, he's just taken a shine to you, dear," she'd say, tossing stale breadcrumbs over the fence, which only strengthened my enemy's resolve and supply lines. On the other side was Mr. Henderson, a perpetually grumpy retiree whose prize-winning roses bordered my property. He was firmly on my side. "That feathered menace dug up one of my prize-winning peace roses yesterday," he grumbled to me over the fence, shaking a fist. "You need to handle this, son. For the good of the neighborhood." Emboldened by this alliance, I decided on a campaign of psychological warfare. I bought a small, motion-activated sprinkler. The Scarecrow, it was called. The box promised it would humanely deter everything from deer to raccoons. The moment Hannibal crossed the invisible beam, he was blasted with a surprising jet of water. Unlike the water pistol, this startled him. He shot up into the air, honking in fury, and flew a wide circle around my yard before landing back on the sidewalk, thoroughly vexed. Victory was mine. I spent the rest of the day in smug satisfaction, watching him pace back and forth on the public pavement, unable to breach my aquatic fortress. My hubris was my downfall. The next morning, I woke up to a strange sound. A rhythmic thwack thwack thwack. I looked out the window and my blood ran cold. Hannibal wasn't trying to get past the sprinkler. He was attacking it. He had figured out its trigger range. He would waddle just close enough to set it off, jump back, and then, while it was resetting, he would charge in and peck furiously at the plastic casing. He was systematically dismantling my defenses. By the time I ran outside, the Scarecrow was in pieces, its internal tubing pulled out like entrails. Hannibal stood over the wreckage, puffed out his chest and gave me a look that said, "Your move." I was losing my mind. My work was suffering. I'd be in the middle of designing a logo and my mind would drift to goose deterrent strategies. I started having dreams about him. In one, he was my boss, critiquing my design portfolio with a series of dismissive honks. I spent weeks researching. I learned that Canadian geese are fiercely territorial, they mate for life and they have incredible memories. This wasn't just a random squabble for him, this was a legitimate territorial dispute, and in his mind, I was the squatter. My magnum opus of anti-goose technology was the Goose Begone 5000, a contraption of my own design. It was a remote-controlled car chassis with a Bluetooth speaker mounted on top. The plan was simple. I would hide in the house, and when Hannibal entered the yard I would drive the car towards him while blasting predator sounds from the speaker, specifically, the screech of a bald eagle. I spent a whole weekend building it. I felt like a mad scientist. Mr. Henderson watched my progress from his window with a look of grim approval. The day of the test arrived. It was a gray, overcast afternoon, perfect for a clandestine military operation. Hannibal made his grand entrance, waddling towards the vegetable patch. My heart hammered against my ribs. I powered on the RC car, connected my phone to the speaker and hit play. A piercing eagle shriek filled the garden. Hannibal froze, his head cocked. I pressed the joystick forward and the Goose Begone 5000 lurched into action, speeding across the lawn directly at him. For a moment, it was a scene of beautiful, chaotic success. The goose panicked. He turned to run, the little car nipping at his tail feathers, the sound of his mortal enemy chasing him. He was honking in genuine alarm. I was laughing, a wild, crazed laugh of a man pushed to the brink. Then Hannibal's programming shifted from flight to fight. He stopped dead, spun around, and faced his pursuer. The car, still shrieking, rammed into his chest. It barely budged him. He lowered his head and with the precision of a surgeon, he flipped the entire car over with his beak. It lay on its back, wheels spinning uselessly, the eagle screech now sounding muffled and pathetic against the grass. He then proceeded to peck the speaker to death, silencing the eagle once and for all. He gave the car one final, disdainful kick before turning to look directly at my window. I swear he smiled. That was my lowest point. I had been defeated by a goose using military-grade tactics. I had spent time, money, and a significant portion of my mental bandwidth on this war, and I was losing. Badly. Mrs. Gable chose that moment to wander into her garden. "Oh Arthur, what was all that racket?" she called over. "And what's that little toy car doing in your lawn?" I didn't have the strength to explain. "Car trouble," I mumbled, and drew the curtains. I ignored the garden for a few days after that. I let Hannibal have it. I saw him from the window, lording over his new territory. He'd parade around the patio, take naps in the sun on my lawn, and even drink from the birdbath, splashing water everywhere with a blatant disregard for the smaller birds. He had won. The yard was his. A strange sort of depression set in. It wasn't just about the goose anymore. It was about the loss of my sanctuary, the place I went to find peace. Now it was a monument to my own failure. Mr. Henderson came by one evening. "I see the beast has claimed your land," he said, his voice unusually gentle. "Don't give up, son. We can't let anarchy win." "It's no use, Mr. Henderson," I sighed, gesturing to the yard where Hannibal was currently asleep, one leg tucked under him. "He's smarter than I am." "Nonsense," he scoffed. "It's a bird. You're a primate with an opposable thumb. You have the evolutionary advantage." His pep talk, as gruff as it was, sparked something in me. I wasn't going to be beaten. I needed a new strategy. All my plans had been about deterrence and offense. I hadn't tried diplomacy. Or more accurately, appeasement. My new plan was simple. Make a part of the yard so appealing to him that he'd have no reason to bother the rest of it. I would create a goose paradise in the far corner of the lawn, and hopefully, he would stay there. The next weekend, under the watchful, suspicious eye of Hannibal himself, I went to work. I bought a small inflatable kiddie pool and filled it with fresh water. It was much better than his water pistol shower, or the bird bath. I then went to a rural supply store and bought a bag of special waterfowl feed, a mix of cracked corn, oats, and other grains. I read that bread, Mrs. Gable's offering, was actually bad for them. I cordoned off this new goose recreation area, with a small decorative fence that he could easily step over, but that served as a psychological boundary. I filled a bowl with the high-quality feed and placed it next to the pool. Hannibal watched this whole process with deep suspicion. He stood by the azalea bush, his neck a periscope, observing my every move. When I was done, I retreated to the house and watched. He waited for a full hour after I went inside. Then slowly, cautiously, he waddled over. He inspected the low fence. He sniffed at the food. He eyed the pool. He looked back at the house, as if to say, "Is this a trap?" Finally, he dipped his beak into the food. His eyes widened slightly. This was clearly a cut above Mrs. Gable's stale crusts. He gobbled it down. Then he happily hopped into the pool, splashing and cleaning his feathers. It worked. It actually worked. For the next week, a fragile peace treaty was in effect. Hannibal would arrive in the morning, head straight for his corner, eat his breakfast, take a swim, and then mostly keep to himself. He'd still patrol the perimeter, but he stopped tearing up the lawn and leaving his gifts on my patio. I could drink my coffee outside again, albeit with a large goose watching me from his private resort 30 feet away. We had an understanding. Just as I was getting used to this new detente, a new development occurred. Hannibal showed up one morning with a guest. Another goose. This one was slightly smaller, a bit more timid. It was his girlfriend. Or wife. I immediately named her Clarice. My heart sank. Was she going to be a problem too? Would I have to double the size of the recreation area? But Clarice was different. She was polite. She followed Hannibal's lead, ate the food I provided, and enjoyed the pool without the same level of arrogant splashing. The two of them were inseparable. They would waddle around together, preen each other's feathers, and communicate in a series of low, gentle honks. It was actually quite sweet. The dynamic of my backyard had changed. It was no longer a war zone. It was a romantic getaway for two geese in love. Mr. Henderson was less than thrilled. "There's 2 of them now," he exclaimed, horrified. "They'll breed. We'll be overrun." Mrs. Gable, on the other hand, was ecstatic. "Oh, he's found a lady friend. How wonderful, young love." The real turning point, the moment our feud officially ended and transformed into something else entirely, happened about a month later. I noticed that Hannibal's behavior had changed again. He had become hyper-vigilant, more aggressive than he'd been since the early days of our war. But this time, his aggression wasn't directed at me. It was directed outwards, at the world. He would stand guard, neck extended, hissing at squirrels, chasing away crows, and even honking furiously at the mailman's truck. Clarice, meanwhile, was spending a lot of time nestled down in the thick brush at the very back of my property, near the fence line. Curiosity finally got the better of me. One afternoon, when Hannibal was busy chasing a terrified-looking magpie out of the yard, I crept towards the back fence to see what Clarice was doing. As I got closer, she let out a low warning hiss, but she didn't move. And then I saw it. Tucked away under the foliage was a nest, a carefully constructed mound of twigs, leaves, and downy feathers. And in the center of the nest were 5 huge pale eggs. Everything clicked into place. The aggression, the territorialism, the relentless defense of this specific patch of land, it was never about a personal grudge against me. It was about protecting his family. My backyard wasn't just a desirable piece of real estate, it was the safest place he could find to build a home and raise his children. All my contraptions, my attacks, my psychological warfare. I had been the villain this whole time. I was the monster trying to evict a new father who was just trying to keep his unborn children safe. A wave of guilt washed over me. I looked at Hannibal, who had returned to his post and was watching me with wary eyes. I wasn't his enemy. I was his landlord. And I had been a terrible one. From that day on, I changed my approach completely. I was no longer a rival. I was a guardian. I reinforced the goose recreation area to keep it safe. I made sure their food and water were always fresh. I even started talking to them. "Morning, Hannibal. Clarice. Hope the eggs are okay." They'd watch me, their heads cocked, occasionally offering a soft honk in reply. I explained the situation to Mr. Henderson. "He's not a menace, he's a father," I said, pointing to the hidden nest. He squinted, his grumpy facade cracking just a little. "A father, you say? Well, I'll be. Still, keep them out of my roses." But his tone was softer. Even he couldn't argue with the new dad's protective instincts. The day the eggs hatched was one of the most magical days of my life. I heard a new sound from the backyard, a faint high-pitched peeping. I looked out, and there was Hannibal, puffed up with more pride than I thought a goose could contain, marching in a line with Clarice and 5 tiny fluffy yellow goslings. They were the most absurdly adorable things I had ever seen. Hannibal's horde, I called them. My entire routine changed. I became the unofficial protector of this little goose family. I'd watch from my window as Hannibal and Clarice taught their babies how to swim in the kiddie pool. I'd make sure the neighborhood cats stayed away. My garden was no longer just mine. It was a shared space, a nursery. Mrs. Gable was practically a godmother, leaving little dishes of finely chopped lettuce near the recreation area, which Clarice would dutifully show the goslings how to eat. Even Mr. Henderson was won over. I caught him one morning, when he thought no one was looking, smiling faintly as the 5 goslings stumbled over each other in a clumsy attempt to climb out of the pool. The feud was a distant memory. Hannibal and I had a new relationship. It was one of mutual respect. He understood I was the provider of food and safety. I understood he was the head of security. If I went out into the garden, he would approach, not with aggression, but with a quiet dignity. He'd stand a few feet away, make a low rumbling honk, and I'd greet him back. We were colleagues. The goslings grew up fast. Soon they were awkward, lanky teenage geese, almost as big as their parents, and just as loud. My backyard was a constant cacophony of honks, peeps, and splashes. It was chaos. It was messy, and I loved it. By the end of the summer, it was time for them to go. I knew it was coming. One morning, the whole family was gathered on the lawn. There was a different energy in the air, a restlessness. Hannibal gave a loud, clear honk, and the whole family started flapping their wings. He looked over at me, standing on my patio, coffee in hand. He gave one last, soft honk. It didn't sound like a challenge or a declaration anymore. It sounded like, goodbye. And maybe, just maybe, thank you. Then with a running start, the 7 of them took to the skies. I watched them circle my house once, then twice, before falling into formation and heading south. My garden was silent for the first time in months. It was clean. It was peaceful. And it felt painfully empty. The war was over. The peace that followed was even better. And the silence that came after was the saddest part of all. But the story doesn't end there. Because the following spring, as I was sitting on my patio with my morning coffee, I heard a familiar, rusty horn honk. I looked up and there, waddling out from behind the azalea bush, was Hannibal. He was alone. He walked to the center of the lawn, looked at me and honked again. It was a greeting. He was back. And a few minutes later, Clarice appeared, followed by their 5, now fully grown children from the previous year. They hadn't forgotten. They had come back to the place they knew was safe. To their summer home. My home. And this time, I didn't reach for a water pistol or an RC car. I just smiled, went inside, and filled up the food bowl in the pool. The landlord was happy to have his tenants back.
Thanks for watching. If you got this far, leave a comment, like if you liked it, and follow for more.